Guys, today we're going to be looking at the new Dawning weapon for this year's Dawning 2024. Now, without a doubt, this is one of the buggiest holiday events Bungie has ever had, and that's an entire video within itself. But if there is one good thing about this year's Dawning, it's the loot. The loot is actually good, from Glacial Chasm and its new rolls to Stay Frosty to even this new adaptive burst linear fusion rifle, Mistral Lift. Now, I know linears haven't been meta for quite some time, but something tells me Bungie could be making linears meta again, especially with Heresy right around the corner. Now, as far as the perks on Mistral Lift, in our third column, we have some pretty solid options. First, we have Withering Gaze. This is a new perk added this season, which reads that aiming this weapon for a short period of time without firing grants the ability to weaken the next target. Now, the timer resets after firing or when you stop aiming down sights. Now, how this works is you need to be aiming down sights without shooting for 1.5 seconds, which will then proc Withering Gaze, allowing your next shot to apply weaken to the target. Now, this is just your normal Void Weaken, which is a 15% debuff lasting for 6 seconds. Now, for the enhanced version of this perk, not really worth it in my opinion, as it just decreases the activation time down to 1.4 seconds. But in terms of the perk itself on this linear, it's not a bad perk. We're gonna go over some damage numbers here later. I think what makes Withering somewhat desirable, especially with dealing with champions, is you've got a trait right here that allows you to apply weaken simply for aiming down sights. Get a stun off, you aim down sights. And keep in mind, this is a charge time weapon, meaning even though it takes, with the enhanced version, 1.4 seconds to activate, it's really only 1 second you're having to sit there and wait to get the proc of Withering Gaze, and that's due to the time of charging the weapon. Again, more on damage numbers in just a moment. Now that brings us to another trait that's on this weapon in that third column, Envious Arsenal. This is a very popular trait, guys. Dealing damage with both other weapons before readying this weapon refills it from reserves. This is essentially bait and switch, but for reloads. And considering that bait and switch is also present in that fourth column, it's a perfect pairing. For the enhanced version of Envious Arsenal, it passively grants plus 20 inventory size, which is the equivalent to 1 reserve mod, which is excellent considering you can no longer do armor swaps and mod swaps without it taking away your ammo. This one is definitely worth enhancing though, and it has cemented itself as one of the top perks for DPS rotations, especially considering how well it pairs with perks like bait and switch. Now, there are definitely some other solid options here. You got Envious Assassin, where defeating targets with other weapons before drawing this one transfers ammo to the magazine from reserves. This effect can overflow the magazine based on the number of targets defeated. Now, this allows you to overflow your weapon up to 200%. Now, our enhanced version for this increases the percentage of skills that it overflows, with primaries going from 10% to 12.5% per kill, special weapons going from 20% to 22.5%. And although I do really love Envious Assassin, it conflicts with the origin trait present on this linear, that being Veist Stinger. You see, Veist Stinger says that damaging an enemy with this weapon has a small chance to reload the magazine, and it increases movement speed while aiming down sights. It's a great perk, guys, essentially allowing you a means of reloading your weapon, and we're going to talk more about it in just a moment. But the point is that any ammo that is overflowed, this conflicts with Veist, not allowing it to proc. It only works for the base magazine. Now, another good perk that's also present on this weapon is Reconstruction. Fantastic for running and gunning. The weapon slowly reloads itself over time up to double capacity. This used to be one of the best perks in the game, but keep in mind, Reconstruction did get a nerf. It now takes 6 seconds after not shooting to reload, or 5.5 seconds with the enhanced version. Still a great perk though, guys. I like Reconstruction simply for the peace of mind. Granted, there are other great options in this third column. Now, moving on to our fourth column. In terms of DPS rotations, especially when pairing Envious Arsenal into the mix, bait and switch is a no-brainer. Dealing damage with all equipped weapons within a short time gives this weapon a damage boost. Now, this is a 30% increase in damage, and it lasts for 10 seconds after damaging a target with your other 2 weapons. Now, the enhanced version increases that buff duration to 11 seconds, but this, in my opinion, is the best damage perk, especially with Envious Arsenal. You've got 2 perks here working in tandem together, both requiring you to do damage with your other 2 weapons, but when you do so, you get a 30% damage buff and you top off your ammo. Now, a perk that we used to look at as being the best perk for this archetype in particular is Precision Instruments. Dealing sustained damage increases precision damage. This buff stacks up to 6 times, and at max stacks, you're getting a 25% increase in damage. With the enhanced version, upping each stack, giving you a 30% damage buff at max stacks. Now, at one time, this was the perk for this particular archetype. 3-round bursts meant that you would get 3 stacks of Precision Instruments every single shot. which means within 2 shots, you had max stacks, which was quite nasty. However, Bungie has since nerfed Precision Instruments where it only gives you 2 stacks of Precision Instrument per shot, meaning it takes 3 shots in order to reach that 30% buff. Now, I still do think that Precision Instrument is a good perk. Granted, not the best perk. Bait and switch still seems to be the stronger option. Other perks that are present here include Firing Line, which is a 20% buff, but keep in mind you have to have allies within 15 meters of you, and you need 2 of them. The other perk is High Ground, which gives you a 25% increase in damage at max stacks. Now, High Ground got nerfed in PvP, but in PvE, it's good. As long as you physically have the high ground, you got a 25% buff. It lasts for 7 seconds, or if you keep getting hits while holding the high ground, that timer refreshes, with the enhanced version giving you +5 reload speed. High ground is situational, but keep in mind you do have bosses like the Witness, where standing on that platform literally keeps high ground proc the entire time. I know it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's like, how are we higher than him? But I suppose as long as we're higher than his toes, that's all that matters. Therefore, high ground procs. Now, a little more depth on our origin trait that's present here. The first one is the Dawning Surprise. This is the Dawning specific origin trait, and it reads that defeating targets awards a Dawning gift. Defeated powerful targets counts as more than 1. Now, the Dawning gifts that spawn from this origin trait grant 10% grenade, melee, and class ability energy, and it also restores 22 HP, as well as beginning health regeneration. It takes about 6 kills on red bar enemies to proc, and about 2 kills on elites, mini bosses, and bosses. And no lie, guys, it's actually not a bad origin trait. Not necessarily something I'm going to use here on a heavy weapon, but on other Dawning weapons, yeah. Now, the real origin trait I think most people are going to be going with is Veist Stinger. We talked about that just a second ago, where it essentially auto reloads your weapon as you damage an enemy. But keep in mind, this conflicts with any perks that overflow the weapon. It only works with the base magazine. So Reconstruction, Envious Assassin, there's conflict with Veist Stinger. Now, linear fusion rifles have about a 10% chance of activating the perk each hit. Now, once activated, it will refill 25% of your magazine from reserves and also grant that 10% reduce ADS movement speed penalty for 7 seconds, which is kind of whatever. But this is a great origin trait as it allows you to shoot multiple shots off, especially on this particular archetype. Because it's a burst fire weapon, each one of these has a chance of proccing Veist Stinger. And although 10% is nothing to brag about, for a burst fire weapon, it actually procs more than you would think. Now, before we talk about my god roll from Mistral Lift, I do want to look at some damage numbers on this thing. This is just some preliminary testing, doing some simulations against Carl. We'll also likely be doing a full damage test soon and start getting some comparisons against other linear fusion rifles. First up, we have Envious Arsenal plus Bait and Switch plus Veist Stinger active. Now, these traits are enhanced, which means Envious Arsenal gives us that 1 extra shot in reserves, bringing our total damage to 2,072,214 and our DPS to 55,064. Next up, we have Envious Arsenal plus Bait and Switch. Again, perks also enhanced here, but keep in mind, Veist Stinger doesn't really come into play since we're able to overflow all of our shots into our magazine anyways. Our total damage is 1,977,024 and our DPS is 54,588. Solid numbers, but it's that 1 extra shot that we're missing here as we don't have enhanced arsenal on this roll. Now, I also wanted to test out Withering Gaze and Bait and Switch. I didn't get the exact roll, so these numbers are calculated, but our total damage should be around 2,019,860, with our DPS coming in at 45,595. Now, total damage with this perk is pretty solid, but our DPS is lower than our other tests, considering we needed to manually reload a few times. Again, the way I would look at Withering Gaze is more or less like, hey, I've got a champion, I want to do more damage, my teammate just stunned him, I'm going to be aiming down sights, proccing this weekend to support myself, increasing my own damage, but also increasing the damage for my fire team. Now, I don't believe that Bait and Switch is the way to go with something like Withering Gaze. I would actually consider Precision Instruments, High Ground, and that's an easy one to get procced. Bait and Switch kind of has too much conflict here because it's like, yo, I've got to hit 2 shots with my other weapons, then I got to aim down sights, wait for Withering Gaze to proc. It's a lot of hoops, guys, and I wouldn't recommend it. Now, in terms of how it compares to other linear fusions, I think one that jumps to mind is, of course, Scintillation. But I also wanted to compare it to things like Cataclysmic, Briar's Contempt. These are all very well-known linears. And if you take things like Cataclysmic, at one time, that was the meta. Now, in terms of Scintillation, we previously determined in our review that rewind rounds is the way to go when paired with Veist Stinger, as you essentially never have to reload. If you have the Adept version, you can run Adept charge time. And if you look at the values here, rewind rounds plus Bait Bane switch on Scintillation brings our damage up to a total of 2,072,214 and a DPS value of 57,695. Now, Scintillation also rolls with Surrounded, which I know is pretty niche, but if you can't get it to proc, total damage goes up to 2,367,882 and our DPS jumps up substantially to 82,553. Now, Briar's Contempt is an interesting one because it can roll rolls like Rewind plus Surrounded. It gives us a total damage value of 2,367,882 and a DPS value of 71,565. Now, lastly, we have Cataclysmic with 4 times the charm and Bane switch. Our total damage was 2,143,716, which is higher than our Bane switch rolls on Mistral and Scintillation, but the DPS does fall behind here, dropping as low as 44,973. It's primarily because you have to reload, but man, Cataclysmic has fallen from grace, dude. This used to be the weapon. Now, we'll be doing some damage testing this week on certain bosses, most notably Greg. I just wanted to give you kind of a snapshot of what we're looking at here on Carl. The point is, though, is that Mistral Lift, in my opinion, is still worth getting. That Envious Arsenal Bane switch roll is top notch. They synergize too well together. And even though, yes, you've got rolls like Surrounded, Briar's Contempt, and Scintillation, the numbers there heavily favors those weapons. But that's a very niche perk. And there's only a handful of encounters that I can actually proc that perk and keep it procced throughout a damage phase. Now, as far as the battery perk for this weapon, I would suggest Enhanced Battery. This will give you one more shot in your magazine. Definitely want to get a Charge Time Masterword to pick up that DPS. And in terms of your mods, you probably just want to run Backup Mag, as really none of the other mods are beneficial. There's not an Adept version of this, so we can't do things like an Adept Charge Time mod, which is why on paper, Scintillation is still a bit better. Again, though, from a DPS perspective. If at any point in the next act, or even in the next episode, we get some artifact mods that benefit linear fusion rifles, for me, Mistral Lift may become my top choice when it comes to dealing with champions, which is why I want you to consider that Withering Gaze precision instrument roll, or perhaps even high ground. But I can't overlook the ability to self-proc weaken, especially for champions. The synergies it'll have with different subclasses, the benefits is going to net your fire team, and on top of that, the conservation of ammo, since it's going to take you less shots to take down that champion due to that weaken. Yes, I know on paper Mistral Lift doesn't beat Scintillation, but I can see the value in this linear. So those are like my 2 gone rolls for this weapon. Envious Arsenal Bane switch, Enhanced Battery, and my other roll, Withering Gaze, Precision Instrument, or even High Ground. Probably leaning more toward Precision Instrument, but that right there is going to be my anti-champion version of this weapon. That is our review though from Mistral Lift. If you want a guide on how to optimize the Dawning events, you can check out our guide down below. It is a bit buggy, so definitely check out our guide. There are ways to navigate around the bugs, and you definitely want to get the double traits here, as it makes for getting the God roll much easier. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.